Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Tom Karako, and on behalf of the CSIS Missile Defense Project, we're happy to welcome today Mr. Mike White to kick us off for a half-day event on hypersonic strike and defense. Mr. White, of course, is the Principal Director for Hypersonics in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. He's published numerous papers on this topic over the years, and his previous experience includes serving as the head of the Air and Missile Defense sector at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Lab. We've got a very robust online audience today because of the topic and for our speaker. Before we get started, I want to just remind folks online that there's a box or a button on the CSIS event webpage, and you can use that to submit questions for Mr. White. And through the magic of 5G wireless technology, which I think is one of the priorities for R&E, that'll come to my tablet and I'll pose the questions to our speaker. So the first part of today is going to be a conversation with the two of us. And then after a short break, we'll break for about 15 minutes. And then we'll come back and have an industry panel kind of looking at some of the same questions with representatives of three defense primes. So Mike, thank you for joining us. I think this might be the first time you're at CSIS, so
I believe so, yeah.
Glad to have you. I wonder if you might start with, kick us off with just a little bit about your position, what you're up to, and of course, what I think everybody wants to hear about, the 22 budget submission. So over to you.
All right, thanks, Tom. Appreciate being here and the opportunity to speak. As you mentioned, I'm the Principal Director for Hypersonics in R&E, and R&E has developed a set of modernization priorities to be responsive to the National Defense Strategy. And to make sure that we are delivering the warfighting capability we need to deter and, if necessary, defeat our future adversaries in a highly competitive and constrained battlefield environment. Hypersonics is a key element of the kinetic modernization activity in delivering high-speed, long-range, highly survivable lethal effects to take out targets of highest priority on the battlefield. In my responsibility as a principal director, I'm responsible not only for the delivery of transformational warfighting capability based on hypersonic systems on the offensive side, but also making sure that we are positioned well in defense against adversary hypersonics. So working very closely with the services in developing offensive strike capabilities and with the Missile Defense Agency and the Space Development Agency on the defense against hypersonic side as well. And so it really keeps things pretty busy relative to the orchestration, if you will, the coordination, the integration of the department-wide activity related to offensive and defensive hypersonics. Let me just key on that for a second and make sure I emphasize that it is really truly an integrated activity. It's integrated within the offensive construct, and the services working together to develop the transformational warfighting capability to deliver hypersonic strike effects from air, land, and sea launch platforms. But it's also integrated from the perspective of the offensive and defensive side. As we move into the discovery phase for how we actually transition hypersonic system concepts and technologies into warfighting capability, there's a lot to be learned in all of our activity, ground test, technology development, and flight test relative to future offensive systems, as well as defense against future systems. So for an example, when we do a flight test of a future offensive strike concept, the Missile Defense Agency takes advantage of that flight test to gather data to help define and direct future defensive system capability. So we're working truly across the department, agencies, services, to make sure that we're integrating the knowledge gained throughout our portfolio to maximize the capability and to accelerate the transition of the capability to the warfighter. I often describe my position not as a hypersonic from the perspective of hypersonics, because we tend to, in the world of hypersonics, we tend to think technology, we tend to think laboratory and kind of building out from the laboratory. Really, I describe my position as delivering transformational warfighting capability that is based on hypersonic systems. So I said that now for the second time because it really is what we're trying to do. It's how do we make sure we look at what the warfighter needs from an offensive and defensive perspective, and then accelerate the transition of the technologies and concepts in the hypersonic domain to deliver transformational warfighting effects to serve those needs moving forward. So it's an important area, important topic. Got great interest throughout the department, great interest on the Hill, great support in what we're trying to do. I think a number of the talks I've given recently, I've gone through the strategy of what we're trying to do, so I won't do that here. Again, suffice it to say, as a reminder, we've got a 3-element strategy, offensive, defensive capabilities being 2 of the 3 elements, and the third element being future reusable systems. So think hypersonic aircraft, reusable hypersonic aircraft. And we're working all 3 of those elements at various degrees of acceleration throughout the portfolio. What I'll focus on just in my opening comments and then turn it over, obviously, for your questions, is that very recently, Friday, the budget dropped for 22. And the budget drop for 22 is a very important statement from the department about the importance of hypersonics and the department's decision to fund our accelerated fielding strategy, both on the offensive side and then to move forward to accelerate our defensive posture as well. So we've got strong commitment in the new administration for our strategy and moving forward to really rapidly mature and deliver hypersonic-based capabilities.
Great. All right, well, thank you. Let me just begin with, I would say, a couple questions that are going to seem to you super elementary. But for those of us who have never been confused with engineers or physics guys, when you say hypersonic, what does that mean exactly? What is the set of characteristics that you include in that bucket?
Yeah, if I were to summarize hypersonics in one word, or 2 words, I'd say really fast, right? So the traditional kind of rule of thumb that we use for hypersonics is you're flying 5 times the speed of sound. And the speed of sound, at sea level is on the order of 740 miles an hour or so. So, think 3,700 miles an hour at sea level. But obviously, we're flying at much higher altitude. It's a little bit lower at higher altitude.
It's a sustained flight. It's not an RV that's
so that was going to be my next point, is that it's sustained flight within the atmosphere at speeds around Mach 5, right? If there's no magic thing that happens at Mach 5.0 versus 4.9 or 4.8 or 4.7. Hypersonic really is a class of supersonic flight that is characterized by pushing the envelope relative to the, I'll call it the aerothermodynamic performance of a vehicle. The temperatures get really hot. You have to worry about chemistry in the air, whereas at lower supersonic speeds, you don't have to worry about the air breaking down and the chemical kinetics in the air. So there's some technical characteristics of hypersonic flight that are important to the engineers in designing vehicles and thermal protection systems and the way vehicles fly. But we really want to make sure that what we're trying to do is characterize what we're doing as high-speed systems on the order of Mach 5 and above. We go significantly above Mach 5. But those systems have the speed necessary to fly sustained flight in the atmosphere, be maneuverable at the high altitudes afforded by that sustained high-speed flight, and be able to deliver long-range lethal effect at very short time scales.
So, folks will usually talk about 2 types of hypersonic missiles, gliders and scramjets. I guess my question for you is it really the case that there are 2 types, or is it more of a spectrum, more of a family of not really propulsion types, but types of flight? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so typically you think of things in terms of hypersonic boost glide systems and then hypersonic cruise missiles as kind of the 2 general categories, but you're right, there is somewhat of a spectrum. The characteristic that we use to really define hypersonic boost glide systems is that pretty much all of the energy added to the hypersonic body is added in a boost rocket stage. And then after that, you glide and actually you encounter drag and that energy gets dissipated and you slow down. So typically boost glide systems boost to very high Mach numbers, especially those going very long range, and then they gradually slow down and get to their end state for their effect. For hypersonic cruise missiles, your initial boost is just to your essentially at or even below your hypersonic cruise Mach number. So you can go all the way to the end state and say, if I want to turn down into my target at 5 times the speed of sound, I can boost to 4 times the speed of sound. My cruise missile scramjet engine can accelerate me from Mach 4 to Mach 5, and then I can just cruise with that engine at Mach 5. So you really need no more energy necessary than to boost to that lower Mach number. So your rocket motors become much, much smaller, and your sustained propulsion is your air-breathing propulsion. So you carry your fuel, but then you burn the oxygen in the air, and so they tend to be much smaller systems. So if you think about long-range hypersonic systems that will fit on a fighter, as an example, you generally want to think about a cruise missile to get to the very long ranges.
But there's prospect of blending that.
There's prospects of blending it. There are concepts where you have very large hypersonic boost glide systems that have scramjets on it to try to minimize that reduction in velocity and get very, very long ranges. There are, aerothermal or boosted systems that are, rocket boosted systems that are not traditional boost glide systems, but they're more boost and then aerodynamic controlled rocket motors like you would see with a standard missile or a THAAD or something like that you would typically have. So there are blends, but for the most part, the advanced systems we're looking at kind of fall in the big, rocket motor boost to a high Mach number, and then a glide or control and sustain flight to the target, or a boost to a cruise and scramjet propulsion.
So that's kind of the what. Let me move to kind of the whys and the hows. What's the demand signal that you're hearing? You mentioned, I think, the word warfighter multiple times in the past couple minutes. What is it that a strike package that includes hypersonic things, what is it that gives a commander that a package of only supersonic and subsonic things does not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if you look at our portfolio of strike capabilities right now, for very long range, it basically is limited to subsonic cruise missiles. We've got JASSM-ER, we got Tomahawk, LRASM is coming online for anti-ship missile. Those are Mach 6/10, Mach 7/10 kind of systems. So if you want to fly 500 miles, it's going to take you an hour to get there from the time you launch the weapon to the time you get there. So the high-speed systems that we're developing, the high-speed strike systems, do that 500 miles on the order of 10 minutes. And so you can just look at the time scale and the compression of the time scale on the battlefield. That's going to be a critical value proposition, if you will, for the hypersonic systems. Our adversaries have a significant inventory of ballistic missiles. They have a significant and are developing a significant inventory of fielded and future hypersonic missiles. And so if you are in a battlefield timescale environment where they're launching strike packages that take on the order of minutes, and our strike packages take on the order of hours, that's not a time scale that that's a time scale asymmetry that we need to make sure we're not allowing to stand. So our development of hypersonic systems for the tactical battlefield really is to make sure that we have the ability to compress that and operate in a compressed battlefield time scale necessary to deter future conflict.
And not just go faster or get everything, but presumably to structure attacks so that the fast things and the slow things may work in tandem.
Yeah, I think that's a common question, is that, well, do you envision everything in the future being hypersonic? And the answer is no. I mean, there's a family of capability that we want to develop and deliver that complement one another. You want to use hypersonic strike packages when you have highly contested environments, for example, because one of the key attributes of hypersonics is you can fly very high, and you can be maneuverable in flight, so you're very survivable against even the best air defenses. And so if you're in a highly contested environment, hypersonic systems give you a degree of lethality that other systems don't give you. You get very long range, so if you need to really reach out and touch somebody, 1,000, 2,000, even 3,000 nautical miles away, You can do that with a hypersonic system, and our current capabilities don't afford that ability. And then you want to deliver lethal effect. So we're delivering highly effective kinetic energy to the target with our warheads. So you couple the kinetic energy with whatever chemical energy you might have, or with a penetrator, and you can do some things with respect to lethality that you otherwise could not do. So range, speed, and therefore time to target, survivability, and lethality are the key attributes that we're taking advantage of. And hypersonics kind of blends them all together into a single system.
Great. So broadly speaking, how would you characterize, I guess, the activity that the United States has been doing? You've been doing this job for a while now. Yeah. How would you characterize the pace that the United States has come to in the past couple of years, both in real terms and relative to our adversaries?
Let me start with the first one. We in hypersonics have gone through fits and starts for decades, right? I've been doing this for 4 decades. Kind of a scary thought to even quantify that, but for 4 decades, I've been through a few of them, right? We had programs in the past where, like the National Aerospace Plane, where we really kind of pulled together a national initiative to go build a hypersonic single-stage-to-orbit airplane. But that every time in the past it's dissipated, and the decision has always been made to not transition the hypersonic opportunity, capability to viable warfighting systems. Our adversaries, our potential adversaries, have made that decision, and they have aggressively over the last decade made the decision to move towards hypersonic systems as they field new capabilities, and that's really dramatically compressing that time scale on the battlefield as I described to you earlier. And so that kind of changes the dynamic. We had the luxury before to not move in this direction. We no longer have that luxury. We cannot allow the asymmetry to stand that involves compression of that battlefield time scale. So we're moving forward. I get the question a lot, what's different this time? How do we know? My industry colleagues are here. They always want to know, well, is it really going to be different this time? And the answer is yes. I think the 22 budget shows that. I think if you get briefed on the adversary environment and the things they're doing, the realization that as announced in the press, they have fielded capability today, and that we don't have. As you understand that landscape, you really understand how real this is and how important. It's a national imperative in my mind that we move forward and deliver our warfighters this capability.
Well, on that note, and I'll just say for the record, but your detailed budget docs just dropped about an hour ago. But we did notice that the JHTO, the Joint Hypersonic Transition Office, is in there again, if I'm not mistaken. Congress likes it, but it went into the PB again.
Yes. So. And more importantly, or I'm sorry, probably not more importantly, for my congressional friends, just as importantly, this time we put it in the department budget, right? So what just dropped is the president's budget that had JHTO in there. So there was a concerted effort in the build for this 22 budget to include the JHTO as part of the department's budget profile, as part of what we're calling the accelerated fielding plan. So Congress seeded it for 2 years, very aggressively. It's allowed us to really get some momentum and get started in a great direction. A university consortium in applied hypersonics has been established and is about to get kicked off in earnest. We're working workforce development initiatives. We're working capability-based S&T investments. We're spending about $50 million a year to accelerate our technology that will feed our future capabilities. And so the JHTO is an important part of helping to develop and execute that longer-term look to accelerate transition of new capabilities into our future portfolio. So it's taken hold and done a great job in getting started.
Great. And in your opening remarks, you mentioned reusables. And I think for folks who think about the strike mission, that doesn't quite register. So, but you connected it this time with kind of like a space plane or something like that. So what's the mission that a reusable hypersonic platform, is that ISR? Is it delivering pop-up strike and coming back home? What is that?
I mean, there are 3 primary missions that we focus on for future reusable systems. That is on-demand penetrating ISR. So if you're in a highly contested environment, you have a on-demand need for rapid ISR and maybe even targeting. You can use a reusable hypersonic system to do penetrating ISR. So think SR-71 on steroids, if you really were looking for an analogy. If you're there and you get there quick and you can deliver effects, that's a good thing. So we also think about on-demand penetrating strike capability with a high-speed platform. I mean, right now when we penetrate a platform into a contested environment, it's a B-2 or hopefully B-21 eventually, or a B-1. They're subsonic aircraft. So if you're going to fly 500 miles or 800 miles with a bomber to deliver effects, that's an hour to an hour and a half. If you can do it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, that makes a big difference in that integrated kill chain timescale. So think about delivering effects as well as the ISR&T. And then there's synergy between a platform that could do those things and what you could deliver relative to rapid access to space. So it could serve as a first stage of a two-stage to orbit capability, where you would use the airplane as the first stage and be able to deliver rapidly capabilities into space that you might not otherwise be able to do without that capability. So those are the three mission categories that we're looking at for defining the mission needs in our technology roadmap for reusable systems.
Great. Why don't we turn to programs and budgets?
Okay.
You'll get a lot of questions come in related to those. I thought it would work through the service programs and then do defense-wide, and then move to hypersonic defense after that. So I thought maybe we'd start with the Army. Their long-range hypersonic weapon, LRHW, is at least going to be one of the first systems delivered. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about the cooperation between the Army and the Navy on the Common Hypersonic Glide Body that supports those two programs, what your expectation is on the timeline, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Okay, I really want to step back one half of a step, if you will, before we get into that. I really want to emphasize the department-wide collaboration in what we're doing across the services and agencies, as I mentioned before. But what I want to really point out is the FY22 budget is an important kind of milestone in what we're stating as a department, in that the administration and the department has decided to put forward a budget that reflects a decision to accelerate delivery of capability of the warfighter in numbers. So if you look at how we were funded before the 22 budget, the 21 budget, we were accelerating what I call phase 2 systems, and that is the use of hypersonic capabilities in warfighting system and weapon system constructs, and the maturation of those weapon system concepts. So LRHW, Navy CPS, Arrow, before the Air Force stopped at Hacksaw. Those programs were weapon system prototypes, and we were budgeted to do weapon system prototype development. The 22 budget now budgets to buy those systems once they're developed in numbers moving out. So we're really accelerating the fielding of capability in numbers for the prototype systems that we've been maturing over the last several years.
The Arrow is in procurement.
The Arrow line for this new budget for the out years in particular, but even in 22 is in the procurement line, because the line is there to buy weapons, not to do more development. So that's all we need, is to have our industry partner, Lockheed Martin, deliver the capability, and then we'll start buying them. And so we've got significant budget there to buy the weapons moving forward. So there's really a significant statement being made at our 22 budget, and it's really driving what we call our accelerated fielding strategy. I'll point out that we developed that strategy last year. We put it in the President's budget in what we call the soft lock from the previous administration. When the new administration came in, they reviewed that budget and they endorsed what we had put in there. So we've really been very, very fortunate in having the new administration continue the momentum and step up and champion what we're trying to do with delivering this warfighting capability. So it really is an important statement that we've made in the department and the new administration to move forward. Now it's in the hands of Congress as we move forward to try to make sure that we can communicate the importance of this, and they've been very supportive thus far in what we're trying to do.
Well, that's great news, and to stay with the
Yeah.
department-wide and the
Right.
joint perspective for a moment, you know, I think it's commonly said, oh, look at all these, this forest of hypersonic missile programs out there. You know, is this redundant? Is it repetitive? So I wonder if you could speak, and this was kind of the intent of my service-specific question, but speak to the commonality and the cooperation department-wide that may address those sort of aspersions of redundancy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I've been trying to understand the perspective of those who say, well, there's too many systems and we're being redundant, and I think the thing I've concluded is that people think of hypersonics as a thing. I'm going to go buy a hypersonics, and that means I got one thing that's a hypersonic. It really is not a thing. It's an attribute. It's a capability. And what we're developing is a family of weapon systems that are air, land, and sea, surface and subsurface launched, to deliver a wide range of effects to the battlefield to allow defeat of deep inland targets and not so deep but still inland targets and maritime targets and coastal targets and heavily defended targets and targets on the move. And so there's a family of capability that we need to deliver to the battlefield, and we're looking at multi-mission, multi-platform, multi-domain operations to deliver that capability, and that really requires a family and a portfolio of hypersonic weapons. So hypersonics isn't a thing, and so we shouldn't talk about, well, since there's 4 hypersonic programs and we're being redundant. That's not true at all. We're looking at how do we deliver air-launched cruise missiles to get effects in numbers in the battlefield to go after high-end integrated air missile defense systems. How do we deliver a long-range hypersonic weapon or a Navy CPS capability to have multi-domain options to do deep strike against targets of critical and strategic importance on the battlefield. So if you look at it in terms of what's my mission need and what's my platform delivery option set, and what capability do I want to deliver and what challenge do I want to present to the adversary, there really isn't redundancy. In fact, there's probably more things we should be doing, but we need to walk before we run. So I want to try to make sure I focus on that argument. The other thing is that if you then step back from that and you look at the types of weapons, there is opportunity to leverage across the weapon portfolio in key technology areas. So if we want to develop a seeker for one weapon, we ought to be looking at that same seeker technology for the family of weapons. If we're developing high temperature materials, thermal protection solutions for one weapon, we want to use that same technology and that same capability to enable another weapon. In the area of air-breathing engines with hypersonic cruise missiles, we're looking with the Navy and the Air Force as to how do we develop systems that are compatible with Air Force bombers, Air Force fighters, and then systems that can also fit on an F-18 and fit on a carrier. And so we're looking at potentially different options for hypersonic cruise missiles, but if you decompose the missile into its subsystem elements, there's opportunity for crosstalk across those domains as well. So we are really looking to fully integrate. In fact, right before this meeting, I was on the phone with the Navy, and we were talking about, how do we work with the Air Force on the cruise missile strategy moving forward. So we're constantly in talks to try to find the optimal leverage points in all the programs, with the key eye towards developing mission capability to serve the battlefield needs across the spectrum.
Well, first of all, kudos on the hypersonic is an attribute, not a thing. It's an adjective, not a noun.
Right.
I appreciate that. But I'd be remiss, the cooperation you're talking about there between Air Force and Navy, which cruise missile are you talking about there?
So right now, the 22 budget will have funding in it for a program called HACM. That's a hypersonic cruise missile program. The Air Force is running that program, but the Navy is also working a program called OASUW Increment 2 that's looking at a high-speed F-18 compatible, carrier compatible option, and we're working with the Air Force and Navy are working together. I'm working to try to make sure that we're coordinated and integrated on how we move forward as a nation to develop future cruise missiles.
Great, great. So let's stay on that cooperation thing, come back to the Army and the Navy on long-range hypersonic weapon and CPS. What are you seeing? What kind of lessons, I guess, whether it's Air Force and Navy or Army and Navy, can you describe the cooperation there and kind of what that means for the procurement and the development of other hypersonic things and maybe defense acquisition more broadly?
Yeah, I think that program is the model, to be quite honest with you. So if you look at Navy CPS, Army LRHW, and prior to that, the conventional prompt strike program that was an OSD activity, there really is significant integration between all those activities. General Thurgood, Army RICTO, Admiral Wolf, Navy SP, and myself, we're kind of brothers and battle brothers in getting these programs to be integrated, and I can't compliment them enough as to how well they're working together. The department has an MOU that was signed out in, I think, early 2018, maybe even 2017, but it really establishes the drumbeat and the roles and responsibilities between the Army and the Navy and Missile Defense Agency, actually. So Missile Defense Agency is part of that MOU, and as well as OSD R&E and OSD A&S. And so there's a very strong collaboration across the department in that program. And I think there's another really important collaboration that's happening that again, I want to say is kind of the model in that we developed the Common Hypersonic Glide Body actually out of an OSD-led program in a defense-wide account. The Army and Navy were key parts of that, but it was an OSD activity. And the technology really came from Sandia National Laboratories. And so what we've done is we've demonstrated that successfully in flight, and then we've worked to transition that to Army and Navy weapon system development activities. And at the very early stages, through several really important meetings where we kind of rolled our sleeves up, we decided that not only are we going to have a common all-up round, we're going to have a common glide body, we're going to have a common all-up round. So the Army and Navy got together and said, hey, MOU says Army produces the glide body, Navy is responsible for future design of the glide body and weapon system integration. We're going to work this as a single unit, so the all-up round comes off the line and goes into a Navy canister on one side, it goes into an Army canister on the other, and each weapon system handles the interfaces necessary to make their weapon system viable in the environments that they're in. So the services actually took ownership of the right side of that interface to make sure that the left side could stay common. And it's worked amazingly well. And so we transitioned from an OSD glide body development program to an Army-Navy integrated. It's not a joint program, it's an integrated program of common interest, as a term that we've used, that delivers the all-up round. The other transition I think that's really important in the collaboration is between the government team led by Sandia and industry, right? So as we go into the actual weapon system development, Lockheed Martin is the owner of the all-up round and integrated weapon concept. Dynetics is going to kind of lead the development of the glide body. And what we're doing is we're making sure that the Sandia team and the knowledge in the Sandia Hypersonics team that really drove the development of the glide body is transitioned to industry so that when we get into the weapon system development, all the government knowledge actually is imparted on the industry team, and we can accelerate that transition. Well, I think it's going to be absolutely critical to do that. So right now, for instance, when we build up a glide body, Sandia is still doing that build-up, but the industry team is there working side by side with them. Badges come off so that the industry team can learn what the Sandia guys know, and then we'll flip places. The industry team will lead and Sandia will support, and then we'll transition over fully here later this year, actually.
Let's stay with that program for a minute. The budget docs that came out on Friday specified that the Army will procure the Common Hypersonic Glide Body. Do you expect procurement for that to stay with the Army, or is the Navy going to procure later on?
Nope, the Army will maintain, at least as far as we can see right now, the Army maintains procurement. Funding for Navy rounds goes into the Navy budget, and then the Navy buys them through the Army contract.
Well, good. On that, good that the Army's involved, I guess, in the long-range hypersonic mission. And on that front, you really emphasized the multi-domain aspect of these various missiles that have a hypersonic attribute.
Right.
And I've been struck by what I would say is a kind of a vocal minority that, I don't know, when they talk about multi-domain operations and hypersonic strike, I think they seem to forget that land is one of the domains. Mm-hmm. And so I want to, you've emphasized the remarkable commonality and cooperation between these programs, and you see folks like General Hyten, the vice chairman, and the outgoing Indo-PACOM commander emphasize the need for ground-based fires. So from where you sit, what is it about the utility of ground-based fires? What are the attributes of ground-based fires that give commanders something that you may not be able to get from sea-based or air-based?
Yeah, I think each domain has a set of attributes that have pros and cons, right? And so in the ground-based domain, one of the things you'd like to have is ground-based systems that are there, that you can push the button when you need to push the button, right? I don't have to fly a bomber into the zone. Promptness is absolutely an attribute. And even when we are talking about how we base future land-based systems, if we're talking about mobility, we're talking about prompt mobility. So we want to make sure that that feature of promptness maintains, throughout the portfolio for land-based systems. And for that matter, for all of our domains, we want to make sure that we're able to not only fly where we need to fly quickly, but you got to get to the point where you start flying, right? And you have to be able to do your mission planning and all the stuff you need to do to before you push the button, your targeting, your ISR, and the command and control. All that has to happen. So we've got initiatives in the kill chain to compress the kill chain to make sure we can deliver capability promptly no matter what it is. But that land component gives you the ability to be there when you need to be there. And then you can move it from place to place. Now, you have to be able to have basing rights, and so there's challenges associated with basing rights. So there's on the con side of the ledger, or the challenge side of the ledger, that presents one of the challenges. But that's true with air platforms as well. You have to be able to take off from somewhere, unless you're taking off from the U.S., which is a long flight, right? So there are a lot of things on both sides. I think the most important thing that I focus on in multi-domain operations and conversations, with the Joint Staff or wherever we have those conversations, is the fact that we need, we're going into a highly contested environment, and that highly contested environment is defined by our adversaries' very thoughtful development of high-end systems that challenge our domain dominance in space, in the air, on land, and at sea. And we have to make sure that we've got enough flexibility to be able to deliver effects from multiple domains so that we don't make their problem too easy for them, right? If I have an effect that's only going to come from a carrier and they keep my carriers out because they've got DF-21s and DF-26s or whatever, then I kind of lose, right? So I want to be able to present multiple opportunities to deliver the effects I need to deter and, if necessary, win.
And we're up, I guess, a high-end adversary that needs that constant position.
That's why we're doing this, right?
A couple other things that come to mind is, dispersal, and I would think mass. I mean, there's only so many things. There's only so many Virginia payload modules and VLS tubes out there. Yeah,
so mass is really important, and I think if you look at why we're developing hypersonics, it really is to defeat the high-end systems that keep our traditional mass at bay, right? So ideally, the hypersonic capabilities are complementary to our traditional force in mass, and that we will enable delivering mass through traditional means with the hypersonic systems. We're also working at hypersonics in mass because you have to be able to deliver capability in meaningful numbers even to defeat the high-end targets. So that's kind of where the cruise missiles come into play, right? So the cruise missiles, as I mentioned earlier, are smaller. They're more affordable because of that smaller size. And they're more compatible with a wider range of platforms. And they have a higher loadout for instance, in bombers. So if you were looking at boost glide systems, you're pretty much constrained to the bombers for air launch capability. The cruise missiles bring the fighters into the fight. So, we're developing F-15EX. We got a whole family of F-15 fighters. Our allies have fighters, and so we really are prioritizing our development and accelerated development of the cruise missile so that we can start to bring hypersonic effects and hypersonic capabilities to the fight en masse. Not only buy them en masse because they're more affordable, but also deliver them en masse because we've got a wider option set for the platforms, in particular the fighters, 4th and 5th gen fighters. They allow us to bring the 4th gen fighters into the fight on day one, whereas in a highly contested environment, that's not easy to do.
All right. Let me stay with the platform
Yep.
question there. On the one hand, you got, let's just ask first about the Navy and CPS. Has a decision been made about, which platforms are ultimately going to host the CPS? I know the Zumwalts, there's also some surface or maybe Virginia class subs, things like that. Has a decision been made on who's going to have that?
Yeah, the 22 budget and actually the 21 budget, the congressional mark we took in the 21 budget caused us to step back and rethink the strategy for the Navy fielding options. And the 22 budget really kind of solidified the decision to go to a DDG 1000 as a primary surface launch platform for the Navy CPS. And then we removed the SSGN from our initial fielding strategy, and we continue to focus on the primary future capability, and that's the Virginia. So starting the field in Virginia in the late 2020s and then throughout the 2030s.
Now, I mentioned your detailed budget docs just came out. The CSIS crack research team has been going through those, and
you have your earpiece in.
Our budget guru,
latest updates.
Our budget guru, Wes Rumbaugh, just sent me a note a little bit ago about the TBG, the Tactical Boost Glide, and there's a little comment in there about how there's I guess, exploration of the Tactical Boost Glide for both, I guess, Air Force, but also Navy VLS tubes. Thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I understood your question fully.
Okay.
So the Tactical Boost Glide system is a DARPA flight demonstration capability that is scheduled to demonstrate a, let's call it an advanced hypersonic glide body. The primary focus of the weaponization of that glide body has been through the Aero program with the Air Force. So Air Force and DARPA jointly funded TBG to demonstrate that advanced glide body. In parallel with the glide body demonstration, the Air Force leaned forward and made the decision, several years ago to accelerate the weapon system development that would leverage that glide body. So they've been doing weapon system development, and that's been the Aero program, in parallel with the DARPA program to mature the glide body. And the idea is for the glide body to be mated with the weapon system, in this case the booster for the all-up round for the tactical system, as well as the weapon system for integration with the airplane, and then demonstrate flight by the end of 22 and be available for fielding at the end of 22. And then the 22 budget starts the process to actually buy those moving forward. TBG is later than originally planned, right? They had a problem on the first flight. They're scheduled to fly later this year. The Aero program is pressing ahead. We've got confidence that glide body will work, and so we'll first fly the TBG program, and then quickly thereafter integrate with the Aero program and demonstrate the weapon system is viable. Number of flights of Aero throughout the next year, and then field at the end of 22.
Now, we mentioned Aero has some procurement dollars. How's that program doing? I know there was a little bit of a hiccup in the testing a couple weeks ago. But how would you characterize Aero's progress?
Yeah, I think Aero's progressing well. I mean, they've got a great team down at Eglin. LCMC is running Aero, and as well as HACM, and they got a great team of weapon system developers working Aero. And it's as things progress, as you pull together the weapon system elements necessary to make a no-kidding weapon system, there's discovery along the way. And so we've learned some things. Probably the biggest challenge we have is the supply chain and making sure that we instill quality into the and systems engineering rigor into our weapon system build-ups and make sure that the subsystems that we integrate are ready to go when we integrate them and get those up in the air. So we're working through some challenges with the COVID environment for the last year and getting the subsystems necessary to pull these things together and get moving. But we're working through them, and I'm confident we'll be successful.
Great. Now, I guess maybe on that discovery side, I guess the Air Force had, I would say, a little bit of a programmatic churn, whether it was with, Hacksaw, HACM. I wonder if you might kind of characterize what's going on there, so they kind of shift gears a little bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it churn. I mean, I think the Air Force at the very beginning leaned furthest forward first, okay? Three Fs. And they made a conscious decision to accelerate the development of future hypersonic systems, and they decided to focus on the boost glide systems. And so they looked at the state of the technology. They felt that was the most mature technology at the time relative to that or cruise missiles. And they made the decision to move forward and actually start that weapon system, that parallel weapon system development program for fielding a future capability. And at the same time, they said, hey, there's still a lot of technological risk in this decision, and that neither of these systems have flown yet. And so we want to develop in parallel two options and two opportunities for us to be successful. So they funded both Aero and Hacksaw, and they were different systems. Aero focused on the advanced glide body and true hypersonic glide, and Hacksaw was more of a kind of a ballistic extended glide system that had more technical maturity. It was less risky, but didn't have the performance potential of Aero. And as they matured those two concepts, you always have competing technical maturity as well as competing budget constraints, right? And as they matured those two concepts, they were pleased enough with the progress of Aero and the confidence as we learned more about that design to move forward, that they took Hacksaw to CDR and stopped it, and then focused on Aero moving forward. So they made a conscious decision early on to have a risk reduction opportunity in Hacksaw, and they made the decision to put that on the shelf while we pursued Aero. Now, if Aero fails, we can always pull Hacksaw off the shelf and use it because we got it through CDR and we're ready to go if we need to. But that was a conscious decision that was made. So I wouldn't really call it churn from that perspective. And then HACM really is the cruise missile option, right? So the cruise missiles, the scramjet engines are complex. We've got the DARPA Hawk program that's been developing cruise missiles. We've funded several other initiatives within OSD for future cruise missiles, a program called High-Fly 2, a program called SPEAR, to look at the opportunity space for cruise missiles, and we're maturing those concepts now. And HACM really is the program, no kidding, where we're going to mature a cruise missile weapon system throughout the fit-up. So we're ready to start buying cruise missiles at the end of the fit-up and delivering cruise missiles. So it's first the acceleration plan is really accelerate the production and acquisition of the boost glide systems, as well as accelerating the technical maturity of the cruise missiles and some other options we're looking at, so that we can then be prepared to buy those at the end of the fit-up. So the acceleration plan is multidimensional and has multiple phases that we're accelerating.
Well, that's good to hear because, of course, the fit-up wasn't submitted publicly.
Yeah.
So I've got a submitted question, and that is, the person asks, what is the purpose of Project Mayhem? Which, by the way, is a pretty cool name for a program. And is it just about scramjets or other things as well?
Project Mayhem is to look at the next step in what the opportunity space allows relative to hypersonic cruise missile systems. And so if you look at what we're doing right now and the sizes that we're looking at to deliver capability, you get a certain range and a certain payload to that range and a certain compatibility with the air platforms that we have today. Project Mayhem says, okay, what happens, what can we do to build a much bigger system to deliver more effects at longer range? And so really it's looking at that kind of evolution of capability that you might get to extend out what you can achieve with a highly efficient air-breathing platform, weapon platform, and take advantage of that efficiency, but still extend the range to significant significantly longer ranges than what we're doing today.
So it would still be air breathing?
Yes.
As opposed, okay.
It's primarily an air breathing focus for Mayhem.
Okay, great. Now, I think it was Friday, the Air Force's slides referenced the cooperative program with Australia called CIFIRE.
Yep.
And I wonder if you could kind of describe that, the nature of that cooperation with our Australian allies, and where you see that going. Does that suggest maybe Australia's thinking about getting that capability?
So CIFIRE is an OSD-funded program that we're executing through the Air Force, and it really is to bring the Australians into the fold relative to the development of the cruise missiles. And so we talked about HACM as the FY22 now official, at least in the President's budget official, program for developing the cruise missiles. CIFIRE is an OSD prototyping initiative that where we work with the Australians, equal partnership with the Australians to kind of create the bridge between the tech demos that we have worked with the DARPA Hawk program, the vehicle demos, create the bridge from that to the full-up weapon system program. So, think a tech demo of a vehicle concept with the DARPA activities. CIFIRE is to start accelerating the path forward towards an actual cruise missile weapon configuration, and HACM is to pick that momentum up and accelerate it forward into a viable future weapon.
Great, great. So let's kind of go back to at least defense-wide and DARPA and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about any other DARPA programs? Again, we know the budget docs haven't looked through them all yet. Any other DARPA or other defense-wide things you'd like to highlight?
I think DARPA's doing some interesting things for us with respect to defense. Glidebreaker is an example of some work DARPA's doing, and some other things they're doing on the defensive side. They're really focusing on bringing home the TBG and the Hawk configurations and making sure that the weapon system or the vehicle demos are successful moving forward. So they've been a key player and a key enabler in all that we're doing. Space development agencies, they're a big part of what they're trying to do in space is give us the capability to detect hypersonic incoming rounds as part of our defensive architecture. So they're working very closely with Missile Defense Agency to develop a space architecture that allows us persistent global coverage for tracking as well as targeting and tracking for ground-based targets for hypersonic strikes. So they're a big player as well on the agency side.
Now, I think it was last fall, Aviation Week, maybe some other folks reported on plans at least, or a concept that DARPA wanted to do what they were calling a hypersonic production acceleration facility. Basically the idea being to mass produce hypersonic scramjets. Any update on that or similar efforts?
I don't know that there's an update per se, but if you look at how we're structured, one of the key challenges that we're going to have, and we're having in fact today, is how do we go from the laboratory environment that we all live in from a hypersonics perspective, both on the government side as well as on the industry side, to a environment where we have capability and capacity to produce these weapons in numbers. Right now, if we're building a flight article, we've got scheduled to build part of it in Florida and ship it to Alabama for this machining and send it over to South Carolina to do this, and do all these kind of things that are not vertically integrated, and it's not really conducive to a real production and quantity environment. And then we're working with materials that are not your traditional high rate, high volume production materials. So that DARPA initiative is really looking at how do we vertically integrate, and then how do we improve the processes necessary to take the materials necessary to produce these systems and develop them in numbers and high rate production. So
great. Now, when you talk about moving things around the country for this facility or that, I mean, what comes to mind is wind tunnels. Mm-hmm. And it's great to do, flight testing, but it's cheaper to do things in a wind tunnel if you can find one that's free,
right?
That's open. So can you talk kind of about the quantitative availability of that, but also kind of the qualitative? What are some of the features that we need in wind tunnels to accurately simulate the types of air and heat and so forth?
Really important question, and that, as we accelerate into our accelerated development and then fielding plan, the demand signal on our T&E infrastructure is huge. And you have to couple that demand signal with other activity in the department, like nuclear modernization and Missile Defense Agency testing, where the conditions that these vehicles are exposed to are similar. And so you have to look at our ground test and flight test capability and capacity and kind of map that against the demand signal. Test Resources Management Center is the organization responsible for that for the country. They really own the development plan for our future T&E activity and ground test and flight test capability and capacity. You'll see as you dig into the budget, your earpiece again, you'll see a significant plus up relative to TRMC. That was another part of the acceleration plan that we are already spending on the order of $750 million enhancing our ground and flight test infrastructure, and we've significantly increased that in the 22 budget and beyond to make sure we can meet the demand signal for our wind tunnels and our future flight ranges. So we're looking at expanding the flight opportunities and other ranges we might develop for flight. We're looking at putting together a much more flexible infrastructure for flight testing. So right now we sail a bunch of ships into what we call the string of pearls, and that takes a long time and is problematic and is expensive. TRMC is developing something called Range Hawk, where they're taking Global Hawks and configuring them to perform the functions of the ships, so they're much more flexible and more responsive in how they deploy. They're making investments in wind tunnel capabilities at AEDC to enhance our ability to do air-breathing propulsion testing for hypersonic flight. So as we move to accelerate our cruise missile activity and look at opportunities to rapidly mature the scramjet propulsion systems, they're making investments at AEDC. Right now we rely on NASA Langley. There are partners in using the 8-foot tunnel down at Langley. NASA will continue to be our partner as we look at potentially making investments at Plumbrook. I guess that's now called Armstrong, to look at additional air-breathing capability to reconstitute the HTF up in Ohio. So we're looking across the landscape on the DoD side and NASA side. NASA is truly a partner in hypersonics. We have a quarterly meeting where we coordinate. We just had one the other day, not only in the area of test facilities, but in subject matter expertise. So critical NASA researchers are involved in our DoD programs to give us advice and lend their expertise to our development activities. And then we're also in the reusable area. You mentioned reusables. Reusables can be looked at as dual use. Point-to-point travel with hypersonic systems is an area, or high-speed systems at least, is an area of interest in the commercial world as well as in NASA. So we've got an integrated activity on the reusable side with NASA in developing a technology roadmap moving forward. So wind tunnels are going to be a huge deal, and we're making those investments. The other area on the wind tunnel side that I didn't mention is the arcs. High temperature arcs are really important. Mid-pressure range high temperature arcs, and TRMC is making significant investment at AEDC to enhance their capacity really for doing arc testing for high temperature materials.
Well, right on that subject, we've got a question here from a Michael Aliski. He appears to be a college sophomore at Stanford, class 2023, if I'm doing my math right. And he wants to
Send over your resume.
A lot more sophisticated than when I was a college sophomore. But he's asking, what's the role of composite and advanced materials in hypersonic development, and what's the state of the industrial base for composite materials?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The role is huge. The thermal protection system requirements for hypersonic systems is very significant. The materials that we typically use for thermal protection systems are carbon-based matrix composites, and they take a while to fabricate. They can be finicky, and we can use a lot more work in the area of capability and then producibility relative to delivering those future systems. So materials is a big part of the portfolio necessary for us to be successful.
Well, on that same topic, I wonder if you could speak to the progress of the, I think it's pronounced MOCA initiative, manufacturing of carbon-carbon composites for hypersonic applications. established by the Defense Manufacturing Space and Technology Office for exactly these things.
So that's exactly what that MOCA is supposed to be doing. I mean, MOCA is really to look at the industrial base associated with carbon-carbon and make sure that we're able to do what we need to do to make the investments necessary to make it make it conducive to a high volume, high quality production environment.
Great. Well, of course, you've spent a bit of time over the years on the defense
Yep.
side of the house, including at APL. So let me shift there. So big threshold question. In some respects, the prospect of defeating or defending against a hypersonic missile kind of sounds like ballistic missile defense, and in other respects, it kind of looks like complex air defense. It used to be said that the bombers would always get through, and then it was the ICBMs that would always get through. Threshold question, will the hypersonic missiles always get through? Is hypersonic defense a fool's errand, or is it something worth doing and necessary doing?
That's a very good question. I mean, one of the key attributes of hypersonics that we always talk about is survivability, right? And survivability against high-end threats. And that survivability is derived from a number of attributes in flight. One is the altitude, the fact that we're flying still within the atmosphere, so we can maneuver at will, and that maneuvering makes it very, very hard to create a fire control loop closure on the defensive side. And then there's a speed, obviously. So uncertainties in maneuverability or uncertainties in intercept point prediction get magnified dramatically because you're going so fast. So if I have 2 minutes to fly out to do my intercept, and I think you're going to be at point A, but you're really at point B, in that 2 minutes, if I'm flying slow, I don't move very far, right? So point A, I got enough energy to kind of divert and do what I need to do. But if point B is 200 kilometers left or 200 kilometers right, by the time I get there, I likely don't have enough energy in my interceptor to make that kind of a divert. So we're looking at what we need to do from the interceptor perspective to make the capability available to do intercept in glide phase. We're looking at what can we do with sophisticated algorithms to better do that intercept point prediction and do the command and control necessary to optimize the energy necessary to get to an intercept point. And then we're looking at what do we need to do to close the fire control loop in the end state. So what do I need to do from a seeker and a propulsive divert perspective to close that error out in the end state? And all those things are challenges. They were challenges for ballistic missile defense. The problem was much easier because if you knew where it was at point A, once the rocket motor burned out, you kind of knew where it was going to be at point B. So your update rates and everything you needed to do to close the fire control were available to you. But it was a hard problem, but we've solved that. One of the main reasons our adversaries have probably gone to hypersonic systems is because we've solved that and we know how to do that. And so we just need to work it. What we'll be able to do and how we'll be able to do it is still to be determined. We have a comprehensive strategy for defeat of future adversary and current adversary hypersonic systems. And I think that comprehensive strategy is going to be necessary for hypersonic systems. It's going to be necessary for ballistic systems. It'll be necessary for subsonic systems ultimately too, because it's driven by numbers, right? You have to prevent launch to the extent you can, and then intercept those that are viable launch opportunities when they do occur. And so you have to be able to have the opportunity, and the way we're working it is in terminal and in glide phase to do kinetic defeat as part of a comprehensive strategy for defense against hypersonics, and that's the path we're on.
Well, let me dig into that comprehensive strategy for hypersonic defense. Let me go back to the bomber analogy. Mm-hmm. What was it that our British friends used to contend with bombers? It was flak. And so kind of playing with that, I'm thinking about back in the day, whether it was the dust defense for dealing with ICBM RVs in different ways. I think most folks are familiar with the devastating effects of space debris by virtue of the speed that it can do. And then so just thinking about, in that big picture perspective, what are some different ways to come at this problem? Other to channel the threat, to degrade the threat, to impose costs, make it maneuver earlier, things like that. Different kinds of, as it were, DE flak or electromagnetic flak that can complicate the adversary's lives.
Yeah, there's a range of options that we're looking at. I don't really want to get into the details here, But we are looking, as I mentioned, at kind of what the comprehensive strategy needs to be to present the adversary system with enough challenge to where we can, in layers, have confidence of defeating the system when we need to.
Great. And then in terms of those layers, there's a boost of some kind phase, a different kind of mid-course phase, and then the terminal phase. How would you characterize the relative priority of defense in those several phases right now?
Yeah, boost is hard because you have to be in the right place at the right time. And glide phase is hard because you have to deal with high-speed maneuverability at altitude. And then terminal is hard because as they come back in the atmosphere, they become highly maneuverable systems. We're taking an inside-out approach. We're starting with terminal defense, and we're making sure that we take our capabilities that are very, very exquisite capabilities against cruise missiles and ballistic missiles in the terminal and expand that to include hypersonic weapons. I mean, in the end game, a ballistic missile that might maneuver doesn't look that different than a hypersonic missile that might maneuver, right? And so you can start to look at commonalities at certain things that we might be able to do now or might be working on now, and how do we broaden that application. And then we're stepping out from there and doing glide phase. In air defense, we always have to do layers because one layer is 100% effective, right? So we're looking at glide phase. One of the things that we are doing, working very closely with the Missile Defense Agency, we've accelerated our glide phase program from what originally was planned in the Regional Glide Phase Weapon System Program to now the GPI program, as we've accelerated the development of a glide phase interceptor. And so we've both accelerated offensive and defensive capabilities, and we're working that terminal layer and then glide phase layer as our kinetic defense option set.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the broad area announcement, the BAA for the GPI program really emphasized multi-mission capabilities, so that's kind of right in the wheelhouse. But is that how you would characterize it? The transition from RGPWS to GPI was primarily a function of timing?
As far as acquisition timing, I would say yes. It really was looking at do we do parallel technology development while we're doing weapon system development, or do we do sequential technology development and then weapon system development? And we made the decision as a department to parallelize the technology development and weapon system development so we can field capability earlier. And that's really what we're doing across the board, is that we're accelerating the fielding of initial capability, recognizing that capability won't be the end-all to be-all, and then we're putting together a capability-based S&T strategy and a capability phasing plan strategy that will then look at block upgrades as we move forward, both on the offensive side and the defensive side. So we've moved from the out years in relative to what we want to deliver on the glide phase side and we do that through one, recognizing that we're looking at a base architecture that exists. We're looking at a launch platform constraint that exists, so we know a lot, and we can focus on the technologies that are enabling and do that in parallel with the design to greatly accelerate what we're going to deliver.
Great, great. Now, you did mention earlier the challenge of command and control for active defense of this, as with anything else. What is it about this mission that is different from the BMD or long-range air defense, things like that? Yes, there's some physical characteristics of the hypersonic thing and the environment, but how would we be thinking about solving that C2 or C3 problem for this mission? Or is it going to something that's going to grow out naturally from the missile defense system?
Yeah, there are just a few differences, but they're pretty important, right? So we fly very depressed, right? We're in the atmosphere. We're flying between, hypersonic systems fly very depressed. We fly between 80 and 150 or 200,000 feet. And so compared to a ballistic system, we cross the radar horizon very late, and we're moving pretty fast. And so the time scale for engagement, if you wait to do an organic engagement where you have to cross the radar horizon from the shooting platform before you consummate an engagement, becomes very challenging. And ballistic systems fly pretty high, and you get them pretty early, and then you can predict where they're going to go. And so you can launch pretty early. And so these systems crossing the radar horizon late just from geometry present a challenge in that compressed engagement time scale. The maneuverability, as I mentioned before, is the other challenge, in that at any given point in time, I don't know where that weapon, I might know where it is, I don't know where it's going to be at any future given point in time. And so what direction do I launch my interceptor missile in? And therein lies some of the synergy between terminal and glide phase defense. Can I do something in glide phase that makes the terminal problem easier if I happen to miss, and various other things that we're looking at. So there's a lot of synergy and integration between a truly integrated layer defense strategy that the Navy is very good at, right? Where, if you look at Aegis BMD, you look at Aegis, Navy does integrated layer defense pretty well, and with an integrated combat system construct. And so we're leveraging that in our first instantiation of our hypersonic defense. And so that maneuverability and the fact that we fly depressed compared to ballistic systems, and we cross the radar horizon very late, are challenges that we're trying to address. And to be quite frank, the SDA strategy for proliferated LEO, one of the key drivers is persistent global coverage, so that we can provide track or at least queuing for future engagements based on the space-based element of the fire control loop.
So that was my next question, of course, is what does the 22 budget do for HBTSS, Hypersonic Ballistic Tracking Sensor System, and then for both the H and the B, what's the 22 budget do there?
I won't go into the details because I don't actually remember all the details, but MDA is working very closely with SDA and putting together an integrated architecture. So SDA has their architecture and their set of requirements they're working to. HBTSS complements that, or the SDA architecture complements the HBTSS architecture. And so HBTSS is a well-supported program, and it's an important part of what MDA is doing to do that future defense for not only hypersonic systems, but advanced ballistic systems.
Right. But of course, whether LEO is great, but there's a lot of value to having elevated sensors to get over the horizon, even if it's not orbital. So I wonder if you could talk about the utility of other platforms, high altitude, very high altitude, whether it be fixed wing, lighter than air, stratospheric kind of stuff, to see these things from multiple places.
Yeah, I think the important thing is making sure you have an architecture that can leverage it first, right? You have to be able to take a fire control loop and close that fire control loop based on off-board sensors and make sure your architecture is robust to that. And that's one of the attributes, quite frankly, of the Aegis BMD weapon system, is that you can do launch on remote and even engage on remote. So the organic shooting platform never even gets to track prior to engagement. You're actually engaging on that remote track. And so there's a whole host of capabilities that you can use to get that over the horizon targeting. And some of them are airborne capabilities, some of them are space-based capabilities, and various other opportunities, other ground-based sensors that happen to be in a different place. Right. So if I have a forward ship passing a track to an aft ship, that's the shooting ship. So there, we're looking, the architecture is in place to leverage it, and we're looking at, Missile Defense Agency is looking at how do we best take advantage of the sensors and develop the sensor suite to populate the battle space with persistent global coverage necessary to close the loop.
Well, we're coming up on time. You have really covered the waterfront, which was our intent for strike and defense. Great. Any last words for something you'd like to highlight in the budget we haven't covered, or any other last words about where you see this going?
Yeah, I think in closing, I'll just comment the importance of the national team. This is an activity that we are, I think, is a national imperative. We've got a considerable requirement to modernize our military and our capability to fight in this highly contested future battlefield, and primarily to deter, but if necessary, fight and win in that highly contested future battlefield. And we need to pull together the full complement of national expertise. Government industry partnership is a key aspect of that. The panel that will follow us will be an industry panel of key leaders in the industry team to talk about industry's perspective on this. pulling industry in and making sure that we're doing the right things from bringing the right competencies on board, the right expertise on board, and where the government can complement that, we need to be able to complement that and work hand in glove with industry to solve this problem. It's not a we and them thing. We're all in this together. So the example I gave you with CPS and pulling together the Sandia team and the industry team moving forward. My history at APL, we worked as a technical direction agent in a number of Navy programs and Missile Defense Agency programs where we worked hand in glove with Lockheed and Raytheon in weapon system development. So the government, FFRDC, UARC, infrastructure, and leveraging that to the maximum extent possible, and then industry stepping up and making the investments and the dedicating the workforce and the expertise necessary for us to be successful is going to absolutely be essential. This has to be an integrated national team, and all working this together. And we've made a commitment from the perspective of the department that we need this warfighting capability. We need it enough to be leaning forward significantly in what we're doing and accepting risk, and we need to all step up and do the things necessary to maximize the success and the pace of that success. So systems engineering rigor, assigning the right competencies and the right people to the right problems, making sure that we do the checks and balances necessary to when we fail for the right reasons, because of discovery in this very hard domain as opposed to lack of systems engineering, making sure the government is fully engaged in bringing expertise to industry, and industry is fully engaged in bringing perspective and capability and capacity to the government, that we understand where the investments need to be made across the board to maximize our chance for success. This is too important for us not to bring the best to the game. So looking forward to the team pulling together, and it's an honor and really a privilege to be in a role to lead the effort for the nation.
Well, it's a privilege to have you here. Thanks for coming out. We've covered a lot of scope, and you
inviting
set up
me.
the next panel, so thanks very much. And please come back in about 15 minutes, and we'll have our industry panel to cover anything that Mike White missed. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Well, welcome back, folks. Thanks for joining us for our second part of our half day on hypersonic strike and defense. Again, I'm Tom Karako. We just heard from Mr. Mike White, Director of Hypersonics for the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And having heard the defense-wide government perspective, we want to turn now to an industry perspective. So we've got a number of companies out there that are contributing to this mission. For this panel, we've got three very smart people to tell us kind of where their companies are going, where they see the hypersonic portfolio broadly. First up will be Erin Kocourek. Erin's the Senior Director for the Hypersonics she's the Hypersonics Campaign Lead for Raytheon Missiles and Defense. Next, we have Doug Graham, Vice President for Advanced Programs Development with Lockheed Martin Space. And finally, Lisa Brown, Vice President for Missile Defense Solutions with Northrop Grumman. So I think I'll start with some opening statements from each of you, maybe some reflections on what we just heard, but also your own thoughts about where the portfolio is going. So, Erin, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Tom. And thank you for bringing us together. I really applaud you for getting my industry colleagues and Mr. Mike White here today. It really does take everybody coming to the table. I very much appreciate the opportunity. So good afternoon. My name's Erin Kocourek, and as Tom said, I'm the Hypersonics Campaign Lead for Raytheon Technologies. What that really means is, I'm in the business of connecting people and technology across the Raytheon Technologies organization, as well as across industry, and providing those insights and being a conduit and an advocate for the customer and the warfighter. And we do that in many ways. One, at Raytheon Technologies, we're really looking at how we leverage modeling and simulation to help our customers, form their requirements and develop end-to-end solutions for this important mission. Part of that effort is thinking through the kill chain and the enabling capabilities that allow those effectors to do their jobs, the multiple effectors we have in this portfolio that we're developing. Part of that modeling and simulation is investing in digital engineering, investing in more testing. We know we have a need to accelerate this capability. We just heard that from Mike White. And at Raytheon Technologies, we're really looking across the organization to leverage the enabling capabilities, the modeling and simulation, and the testing to deliver those effects timely as best we can. With that said, we also are looking to partner with academia. We're looking to invest in those relationships, that curriculum, to develop our hypersonics engineers and those of the future. It was great to hear a college student chime in and ask some questions before. And by the way, you can direct his resume to us.
We all said that.
We go first.
Yeah, that's the benefit of going first on the panel. That said, I'm looking forward to your questions and would love to turn it over to my esteemed colleagues, both very great people.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Tom, thank you, and thank you to CSIS and to Mike White for joining us today. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to get together in person. We're not quite totally out of this yet, but I'm hoping the days of the virtual conference are behind us, and I promise you I will not go to another virtual happy hour again, because those were the worst. In any event, thank you for the opportunity to address this group today on a really important and timely topic. We're sort of joking, coming after Mike White, I was sitting there with my carefully prepared talking points, scratching them off one at a time as he covered all the material. And so I said, unless we want to do a pivot to talk about the Stanley Cup, it's going to be a little hard to bring too much new information. But we'll try to provide some slightly different perspectives on some of the same issues and make it interesting for everybody. I think aligning with what Mike talked about a little bit earlier, I've been in this business for more decades than I care to admit to. I think he and I first met when we were doing Falcon HTV-2 post-flight investigation tests. Didn't complete trajectories in either one, but I think we added about an order of magnitude of data to the national database that's enabling a lot of the things we're doing today. But I can't underscore how important the frankly the PB-22 was for this particular enterprise. Because, for those of us who've been in it for decades, this has been a very episodic thing for the U.S. We get serious for a while, we stop. We get serious for a while, we stop. I think with an administration transition to different administrations with different perspectives on some important issues, I think the fact that this administration largely continued and in fact built on the work of the previous administration is hugely important. Because, we have a significant challenge ahead of us, and without the sort of sustained support of the government, including Congress and industry, we're not going to be successful in meeting that challenge. So hugely important development, I think, for all of us. Underscores, some of the perspectives that we take away from it. A lot of programs underway as we kind of jump-started our activities there. Our focus at Lockheed Martin is on program execution and program execution and program execution. The nation is getting back. It's kind of dusting off our flight test infrastructure and capabilities, getting back into the business of flight testing, learning some lessons, as Mike indicated. But I too am confident we're going to be showing successes at the flight test range that's going to feed into the fielding of these initial prototype systems, and then ultimately fielding them in volume, which I think is really important. Mike also talked a little bit about what I call mission differentiation, the perception that we have a whole bunch of hypersonic programs, and they're all essentially doing the same thing. Tom, you kind of led that with a question. I think we have some work to do to explain to people that these are all very different systems, different platforms, in some cases different air-breathing versus glide bodies, different payload sizes, different speeds, different ranges, different survivability. And payload sizes, depending upon whether it's a soft target or a hard target, are very important. So I think we need to do a better job of articulating how all of these systems are complementary, and they give us a family of systems that are enabling us to address what is a really wide range of targets out there. So I think that's important. Last one, affordability. I think we all know this is going to be important. A lot of talk about air-breathing systems being more affordable, which they certainly will be. Glide body systems are going to be more expensive. In some respects, they're more of a high-value asset, but they can't be unaffordable. And so I think a big focus that we're putting into it is figuring out ways to make sure that these systems are affordable. They might be a couple times more expensive than an air-breathing system. They can't be 5 or 10 times more expensive. And so that's, I think, really important to us. On the hypersonic defense side, we talked a little bit about that. The demand signal from the government is more ambiguous there. I think it's kind of a the number in the president's budget is more than was projected to be in the president's budget last year, but it pretty much aligns with what the Congress enacted last year. I think at least part of that is, and Mike talked about that earlier, this hypersonic defense is a really hard problem. It is a very complex problem. Whenever you go talk to people, they're always here, have you discovered the silver bullet to solve hypersonic defense? The answer is there really isn't one. This is a complex problem. It's going to require essentially a layered system of sensors and effectors and a command and control. You need to think about the role of left of launch capabilities as part of this. And I think as a nation, we need to embark, and I think we're in the right path, starting with what you have, leverage what you have to try to provide some limited capability while you go look to put in place the higher payoff solutions that we need, like glide phase systems. And then overarching all of it, of course, is the issue of sensors. You can't kill what you can't see. And this is a really complex problem. You can see these things in boost phase, but contrary to some technical folks that have speculated in public that these things are hot and they're very easy to track, I can tell you that is simply not the case. So that's a big challenge. So sensing capabilities, effectors, command and control, the whole gamut. We've got to work it. It's a complex problem. Hopefully that doesn't lead us to paralysis. It leads us to taking the approach. We're going to start putting the building blocks in place one at a time and go build up the capabilities we need in the future. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and look forward to the dialogue later. Lisa.
Great. Thank you. Lisa.
Thank you very much. And again, it's an honor to be here in person. It's good to be anywhere in person, especially with Mike White. And also thank you for hosting this, Tom, CSIS, and being here with my esteemed colleagues. So I'm humbled to have two hats at Northrop Grumman. So not only do I lead Missile Defense Solutions, which is headquartered in Huntsville, but I'm also the executive lead for Counter Hypersonics campaign across the entire corporation. So just like Erin said, Northrop Grumman realized early on that it was a very complex problem, both on the offense and the defense side. And there's a lot of challenges associated with hypersonics, and Mike mentioned them all very succinctly, which is altitude, speed, maneuverability, and then rate of the incoming threats. And each of those has its own challenges as well, many, many deep. So first off, on the defensive side of the house, I would say that there's several attributes of hypersonic defense, and it's good to see that that funding is starting to become more free. I think for the last several years, the strike side of the house has dwarfed the spending on the defense side. Meanwhile, Northrop Grumman has realized that the threat isn't going away and has continued to self-invest. One of our approaches is the reason that we have a campaign-type philosophy that looks across the breadth of our company as well as our industry partners is if we could spend $1, how do we get $3 worth of goodness out of that satisfies the mission and the warfighter? So for hypersonic defense, you need a proliferated constellation of fire control quality data that you can act on. As you just mentioned, as well as what General Hyten said a few years ago at Space Symposium, you can't shoot it if you can't see it. You need an interceptor. We believe primarily in the glide phase before there's maximum amount of maneuverability of the target. And you need a C2 system that essentially is the backbone and the brains behind a lot of the operation. And I think we would posit at Northrop Grumman that we are the industry leading in all three of those. We are one of the two primes on HBTSS and look forward to continuing the design and development of that system, as well as culminating in a launch in 2023. We work closely. It's funny, we compete against each other a lot, but we also partner a lot, as you mentioned, on the national team with the folks here on the stage. We provide all the technical support and the technical lead positions and horsepower on C2BMC, command and control. And again, we're very excited that MDA has requested $250 million to further glide phase interceptor. And I got a really nice compliment from Dr. Lucia at MDA a few weeks ago. He said that my team does a really nice job of sidling up to the customer and letting them know all the other conversations that we're having with PEO Missiles in Space and Army Futures Command and other agencies and military branches, just to make sure that we all stay the glue that holds us all together, because it's going to take all of us, all the agencies as well as all the industry partners, to solve these really hard problems. And that's why at Northrop Grumman our key slogan is defining possible, and we'll continue that mission to protect the homeland as well as the warfighters.
Great. Well, thank you. I think what I might do is just start with some really broad, open-ended questions for you. And the first one is, what is the state of the industrial base for hypersonic things? Two of you have titles, that are devoted to this area. And yet, as we heard on the last panel, as we've heard in plenty of fora, we've kind of been doing this for, frankly, since the beginning of the Cold War. The early days of the missile age were lots of exploration of hypersonic things, but it hadn't really taken off. And plus, at the end of the Cold War, there was a lot of contraction, not merely of the nuclear enterprise, but lots of other aerospace things. And so what's kind of when you think about the industrial base as being suited to and capable of contending with this new hypersonic renaissance, how would you assess it? Maybe I'll start with Lisa and work back down.
I would say that, frankly, we haven't stopped, even though necessarily there wasn't a large ROI associated with the programs. I believe we've been looking at the hard problems. We provide the propulsion stack that's common for CPS and LRHW, and we just did a live fire test of that last week. While at our facilities in Utah, we continue not only to provide our own propulsion systems in Lockheed, but for others as well across the U.S. So I would say we haven't stopped. I think we're thankful and ready and excited to accelerate the mission. I think that the seriousness of the threat is causing all of us to do a lot of thinking about how we can burn technical risks down sooner in the process, even if they're small experiments. Let's make sure that if we're going to fail, we fail sooner than later. Of course, we don't intend it to fail, but we need to learn lessons. We need to learn them very quickly.
Great.
Yeah, I think from a kind of a technology and experimentation perspective, I think the industry base is fine, because you're right, a lot of that work has been going on, but it's been at the technology level. The challenge we're dealing with now is we're trying to develop a family of systems and initial, kind of prototypes and then transitioning to, to fielding them in scale. And I think there have been more challenges in the industrial base, and that's largely because, the lack of investment that has gone into it for a long time. If there's not money going into it, then it's really hard to sustain the industrial base. So I think as a result of the government's investment in the last couple of years, I think we've been able to make significant progress at kind of beefing up and building up the industrial base to meet the challenges ahead of us. I know, Lockheed Martin in our role, a leadership role in a lot of programs, is looking at how do we leverage these second and third tier suppliers kind of across programs so that we can make them healthy, make them robust so that they can meet the emerging needs of the nation while we start, thinking about kind of longer term, what does the industrial base look like? So we've been able to, I think, work very closely with our government customers and with Mike at OSD to put more and more emphasis on that, because I think the answer is it was fragile, I guess, and we're in the process of building it up. But there's more work to be done, and that's going to be really important. But the most important thing a government can do to try to address that is to make a clear demand signal that this is a priority to us. We're investing billions of dollars, and the government has done that. So now it's kind of up to us to respond. So,
great.
Concur with both. Healthy budgets, bipartisan support, great leader in Mike White setting a vision that's clear. Listening to the warfighters' requirements is all giving, I think, industry a healthy sense of the urgency. The threat is certainly real. It's no longer theoretical. I think industry is responding, and as Mike said, it really requires collaboration. It requires us all coming together, the unity, and I see us doing that. I see Mike commenting on his service colleagues working together. I see us doing the same thing in industry. Certainly, as you referenced with our job titles, we're looking to harness the best out of each of our business areas. In Raytheon Technologies, we're leveraging the capabilities from Collins Aerospace with high temperature materials. We're leveraging the propulsion capabilities in Pratt Whitney. We're pulling in, the sensing, the advanced sensing capabilities we have in-house, and those with our industry partners to really enable these effectors. I see us working more closely together than ever, and I applaud that. It gets me up every day. So I think we're headed in the right direction. And we just need that continued, bipartisan support, advocacy, and just the unity that, we're seeing today.
Great. Let me kind of reattack here with some of the breadcrumbs that you all have left just so far. Doug, you talked about lessons learned. You talked about the Falcon and these other things. What do you think have been some of the lessons learned over maybe the decades, but at least over the past 5 years or so? In terms of development, not merely the steadiness and constancy and sort of generic technological TRL improvement, but what are some other lessons learned?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think the major lesson coming off of Falcon is I feel like, I don't know what Mike said was that, but I feel like we were ready to fly a third time and would have been able to show maybe complete success on the trajectory. But so that's an issue of sort of constancy, because we sort of lost our commitment and sort of it went underground for a while. But I think as we've kind of restarted the enterprise, I think there's been a couple of the key lessons are that we've already talked about a little bit is the importance of building up the supply chain to be able to do this, right? Building up, we could produce one of almost anything, but the idea of being able to make them producible and reliable and then be able to produce them in numbers and something is something that we have to focus on if we're going to do more than just a bunch of experiments. I mean, in the past, part of the problem is when we did experiments, we didn't have a viable path to the fielding of operational capabilities. So I think an industrial base is one of those key elements. Lesson learned we talked about as well, the fragility of the government test infrastructure, how limited that was. If you're serious about this, you've got to invest and build that up. Over the course of the last couple of years through OSD's leadership, I think they're making some, this takes a while. You don't just snap your fingers and spend money this year and hypersonic wind tunnels appear magically, but they're refurbishing Tullahoma. I think our colleagues at Purdue are going to build one there. There's some of that's going on. That sort of infrastructure has to be in place too, because again, lesson from the past, being able to do these things repeatedly, fly enough to have both failures and successes and build up the database you need is critical. If your infrastructure won't let you test but once a year, once or twice a year, and you have a mixed result, then there's some risk you're going to lose your sense of commitment to it as well. And then the last one is, and we learned this in other areas because this is not unique to hypersonics, but it's really in a fast-paced program like these all are, how do you bring about the right degree of kind of system engineering discipline to be able to make sure that you can be successful in your initial flight tests as we restart this mission area up, without falling into the trap of doing this sort of in a traditional, very conservative, 10+ year acquisition cycle, because that just is not adequate to meet the needs that we have as a nation. So how do you adapt your processes so that you have the right level of discipline to enable yourselves to go quickly, be successful, field, and then build on those capabilities. So that's just a couple.
But just that, you did say the supply chain, but the need to build that up in order to get the massive numbers. But that supply chain, especially from a domestic or allied, we don't want to be relying upon the bad guys. That we're not there yet. That's fair to say?
No, I think we're on the path. We're not there yet, for sure. Yep. And I think again, the department didn't add any new programs really this time around. They said we're going to make the investment to buy some of these things at scale. So that just further, it's the demand signal and incentivizes us to be able to continue to build up the supply chain to be able to support those needs.
Right. Erin, I might turn to you, unless you want to engage on that as well. Happy to. But you really emphasize the importance of testing. Yep. And I wonder if you might talk about the broader suite of testing. Yes, you got the wind tunnels and the flight tests, and we just got a question submitted here in terms of, as you think about this, what is the role of simulation in assessing threats and ensuring the blue assets achieve their mission? Modeling and simulation and digital engineering. Yeah. These are buzzwords that are thrown around a lot, but what does that really mean? And how are these, not just bullet points on a proposal, but no kidding, what do these capabilities mean for this mission set?
Sure. So I think I can add a little bit to what Doug was saying, and then segue into the question you asked. I think one way we go faster is through agile development and looking at what requirements we really need, looking at that systems engineering, software engineering development process, and just the acquisition process, and what do we really need to do for quality good enough. So agile engineering, agile development really is a part of what digital engineering is. For Raytheon Technologies, we're investing in that in several tools, and we're able to take common components and look at a method of composability and building up those digital twins and having that ecosystem so we can look at where there's commonality to drive risk down, burn down risk, as well as simulate that environment to show end-to-end mission engineering and really be able to predict and help customers understand quality of service metrics and what each weapon system or enabling capability brings to that particular mission, whether it's ground launch, surface launch, and all the various multi-domain aspects of how we look at hypersonics and their contributions. That modeling and simulation is just very important to helping inform requirements as well as drives out cost. There's a lot of benefits from that operational analysis and simulation and leveraging the digital engineering ecosystem to help in this whole mission.
Let me stay with the digital engineering thing. I mean, I think, again, this is one of those things that's thrown around, but what does that mean exactly? When we talk about digital engineering, for us liberal arts majors, what does that mean?
It means, putting it in a environment, a digital environment, so that you can see the battle space. You can see what that kill chain looks like. You can see what that weapon system or any piece of the enabling capabilities that will cue or enable that effector to do its job in a virtual digital environment.
Let me throw you, Lisa, the lessons learned question as well. I know you mentioned kind of the constancy that your company's had on this over the years, but first, give you an opportunity to swing at that one as well.
I will swing at that one, but I want to foot stomp digital transformation first.
Okay.
Just because I couldn't wait to get a word in. We feel the same way, and frankly, we have recently started partnering with MDA and others to say, how do we believe between industry and government we can partner and shape requirements in the way that the contracts are written such that it enables us to be more agile and employ DevSecOps principles. And we've got recent snippets of greatness where we've taken 4 and 5 months out of ground-based mid-course defense schedules just based upon automated testing, nothing that precludes or goes around anything safety critical or mission critical, anything else. But I mean, just the ability to do automated type testing is one small example of how we can take time and money and people out of the overall schedule. I had someone explain to me digital transformation and agile manufacturing in terms that I understood a year or so ago, which was if you look at Formula One car racing, it used to be that they would limit the teams based upon how much time you could spend on the track because you were going to tweak things actually on the track to go faster. And now what they do is that they limit the amount of modeling time that people are allowed to sit at their computers instead of actual track time. So that's the power behind digital transformation and what's capable with all the modeling and simulation. So I agree with you completely. Lessons learned. I think one of the lessons learned as we go into this next phase where basically a lot of our legacy programs are being recompeted and we're going into new technologies and hypersonics on the offensive and defensive side is learning what skill sets and how agile we need to be in the way that we hire and the skill sets that we're looking for and getting really good at change. I heard a quote the other day that said that, never has change happened so fast in our history. However, if you look forward, this is probably the slowest that we will ever evolve technology as compared to in the future too. So I think recognizing how far we've come and how much further we need to go, it's what skill sets we need to look for that are going to take us there. Not folks who are only willing to look at problems the way they've always looked at problems, but the way that we need to do to continuously evolve.
So let me stay on the workforce thing and really throw it open to all of you.
That's why we all want to hire the gentleman from Stanford. It's a tough market.
So we know that there's somebody at Stanford who's studying this stuff, but I guess what I would say is it's kind of similar to the supply chain. Well, the human supply chain here, how would you quantify the workforce supply here? And whether, I don't know if there's a hypersonic physics major or whatever it is, but when you look out and you're trying to recruit for this field, what's the demand relative to the supply signals?
Can I try first?
Yeah, sure.
You probably could switch our badges back and forth
Yeah,
because
we
we get a
could.
lot of the same answers.
We could.
Absolutely.
So frankly, we're looking for people that in the pure sciences and aerospace engineering, mechanical engineering. I'm a chemical engineer. Who can look at the problem from all different angles, but frankly, with the commercial, there being so much crossover now between the defense industry and a lot of the commercial industries, it's really hard. I mean, we have people going to competitors' locations and passing out free ice cream cones for resumes. I mean, it's the talent pool right now is in great demand.
That's correct. I think I've heard Mike say multiple times there's a national shortage of hypersonic engineers, and industry has a big role in helping to promote, recruit, invest. That's why our partnerships with academia are so important. Our investments in STEM education, working through the Joint Hypersonics Transition Office and the academic consortium is one thing Raytheon Technologies and I believe all of us are doing to partner with these academic institutions and look at their curriculum and degree programs and make recommendations and invest in our internship programs and start early. I mean, we have programs where we bring in high schoolers even to work and inspire and address the shortage of hypersonics talent. Looking in Raytheon Technologies, we have decades of missile experience and working in this domain, and really converting those engineers into hypersonic engineers is one thing we can look at doing to bolster this area.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the same things to say. I think it's, what was it, a couple years ago, I think Mike collected the data, there were like 14 graduates and, PhD graduates in hypersonics or something in the United States of America. I remember that being shocking because I don't know what the number is in China, but I know it's a whole lot higher than that, probably by several orders of magnitude. I think there's been some progress since then. I think obviously the amount of work, the discussion about it and the buzz about it, just as I'll say broadly in the community, the amount of work that's going on in industry, I think it's picking up. We now have more, PhDs in hypersonics going through universities. I think the partnership that the department established with, through the Texas A&M is great, because we are all able to kind of work with them and have an opportunity to both facilitate innovative research and work, but also to be able to identify the employees of the future and to give them an exciting path to exciting work in industry. So I think those are really important. I think there's that's the challenge side of it, and I think we're moving in the right direction. We've got a lot of work to do. I think the really neat part about it is we were talking a little bit about the importance of digital engineering and literally instilling it in your requirements and design process and doing digital twins to validate your systems, and then in a perfect world you're doing additive manufacturing to produce them and that sort of thing. One of the things we find with the young folks that we're bringing in from school these days is you don't have to explain to them why you need to change the way you do things to go digital and stuff. They're already there, right? So they totally get that, and what you mostly have to do is get out of their way, right? Say, here's what we're trying to do, but why don't you kind of go help us? So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm and just incredibly talented folks available out there. And so I think, message to anybody who's listening to this, who's in school somewhere, send us your resumes, send them to me first, but send all of us your resumes. And, if you're a sophomore, do an internship at a couple of our companies and give us a test drive and see what you think. It is a tremendously exciting field. And as I think you can tell, it really does appear this time the country's serious. And we're not only going to, demonstrate these capabilities, we're going to field them initially in limited quantities, and we're going to eventually field them in large quantities because our national security strategy and our national defense strategy really requires it. So
right.
I firmly believe we're in this for the long haul, and so you want to get involved in something exciting, here's an opportunity for you.
Great. Well, I think we heard on the last panel, and I think one of you, maybe Doug, you alluded to the cost question. Mm-hmm. So, of course, digital engineering, these are supply chain people, this is all part of that, but what are some other things that need to be done that industry can do, that government with industry could do to, no kidding, reduce the unit cost of these things so they're not quite so bespoke and expensive. That's the ambition, that's the aspiration, mm-hmm. To truly have these things in mass. But when you think about reducing the cost of these things, what comes to mind? Lisa?
Well, I feel like I gave my best example a second ago, which is that working closely with the customer to redefine the requirements so that it opens up the way that we do PDR, CDR, those kind of meetings, the way key decisions are made that enable an agile mindset.
Yeah. Anybody else? I guess I would just add, as we start up these programs, I think there's some of them that were, I'll say, relatively mature, at least in terms of their designs and that sort of thing, where their ability to take an existing design and make it much more affordable is more limited. But I think we've all embraced affordability as a key driver to where we're going as we evolve these things in the future. So making the investments in the supply chain, volume helps enormously, right? Building a couple of anything is going to be expensive. So building them in volume, I think, is going to help. Driving into affordability, leveraging common systems and components across programs. Mike alluded to that word. We are trying to do a lot of that, across the programs and government. It's been talked about earlier. I can't overstate how important it was for the Army and the Navy to kind of get together and establish the partnership they did between the IRCPS and LRHW program. I've been at this rodeo for a while. Normal behavior on the part of the services, they all have unique requirements. That means they have to have their own system, and they couldn't possibly imagine sharing an all-up-round between two services. So I give tremendous credit to Admiral Wolf and General Thurgood and Mike White and the folks at OSD. Mark Lewis in front of them, kind of helping to facilitate that sort of a partnership, because otherwise we'd have had two separate programs, at close to double the cost of what we're doing now. The DARPA OpFires program is leveraging the TBG glide body We've talked about those things as well as Aero. So the government's doing a lot of smart things itself up front to keep this affordable. And I think increasingly going forward in industry as we design, the evolutions to systems or systems like Aero and that kind of thing, we've been able to design more producibility and affordability into it. Same with Hawk. And we just need to continue to drive that because the nation needs to be able to field these things en masse. And they're not going to be able to do that if we don't make them affordable. So it's a very high priority.
Sure, yeah. I think the only, other thing to add is what Mike also alluded to, that vertical integration and the manufacturing capabilities, that not just manufacturing and that vertical integration, but also the testing facilities. More. We're seeing the investment and the funding to improve our testing capabilities from wind tunnels to everything else. And I think allied cooperation could also play a role in the affordability. We're starting to see that with the SciFire. I think that the thing to foot stomp here, though, is getting us all to the table. The communication piece, the collaboration that we're following Mike and the services lead to really leverage the commonalities where we can is really going to be the cost saver. And then having the test facilities that are readily available and such that we don't have to ship things and do final integration in various piece parts in multiple areas. That vertical integration is the other key thing, I think.
Let me stay on the allied cooperation thing. You mentioned Australia. They also have a really big test range, for instance. It's nice to use. But other folks are talking about this as well. The Japanese, the various European partners. In some respects, the global interest in this and the interest in partnering on the S&T and engineering side of this kind of reminds me of the SDI period, where everybody, here's a hard problem, go try to figure it out. Further comments on the prospects, other interesting allied cooperative programs that are out there that might be worth exploring. Lisa, Doug?
So we have an ongoing contract with the Australian Space Agency where we're selling them what we call zombies, which are hypersonic test vehicles, to further their understanding. And the other thing we're doing is we're acting as matchmaker between different programs we have with the U.S. government and the Australian government so that each can benefit from the data of the other. So yes, our very maturing quickly relationship with the Australians, and we have a Northrop Grumman focus in that country, as well as our own VPs that lead that business. So staying in close collaboration with the customer and trying to tie them into U.S. efforts.
Good.
Yeah, I'm just going to add, I think the issue of the potential international partnerships here is really important to all of us. And I think it's, I was there for the early SDI days. I seem to recall there was, U.S. made the invitation. There weren't a lot of takers right away. God love the U.K. signed up early, and it's one of our closest allies. But that sort of took a while. I think it really, when they finally became impressed with the threat and the need for it, then they started moving. What I'm seeing here has been, say, a little bit less of of us kind of forcing interest on them. These countries have kind of looked at the security situation themselves, and I think they're increasingly deciding that when they need to invest their resources, they're generally looking to increase their investments, but where they're going to invest them is in the kind of the sort of more high-end strategic capabilities. They're not necessarily buying more helicopters and those sorts of things. They're starting to think about laser weapons and hypersonic strike and hypersonic defense. So I think that's going to be very, very important. Australia has shown some significant interest. Was just doing a little playing around with the Woomera. I've actually been to Woomera, believe it or not, and it's quite a place. It's very isolated, which for a test range is really great. I thought it was bigger than White Sands. It's more than 10 times bigger than White Sands. I mean, it's just stunning how large it is. And they're interested both in hypersonic strike and hypersonic defense. So, I think there's a really interesting potential opportunity for the U.S. the U.S. government to sort of partner and to kind of expand, the coalition, the willing of kind of allies and partners that want to get involved in this business. And by the way, if it isn't just technology demonstration experiment, if they're actually acquiring systems, developing their own and acquiring those, they're adding capability. Allied capability expansion is something that helps us address the threats that we're facing, so we don't have to do it entirely ourselves. So I think it's an important area going forward. And
willing potentially to co-invest in co-development.
Yeah.
They have the same desires that we do when it comes to establishing a workforce, a high-tech workforce that leans forward into these hard problems. So they're also very interested in conversations about co-development.
Great. Anything else on that?
No, I think, they covered it. I think modeling and simulation, again, is worth noting here, and that potential to share data with our allied partners for those, enabling capabilities, but certainly stand ready to follow the national defense strategy and that pillar of international cooperation with our government partners.
So as you look, we've discussed supply chains, tunnels, the prospect for mass production, things like that. When you look out, put out a couple years here, what do you see as kind of the biggest barrier on first the design side of hypersonic strike weapons, but then also their manufacture and validation? Where are the knees in the curve? Where are the choke points and bottlenecks? And perhaps they're already being addressed, but any particular pain points?
Do you want to go? I'll take a stab at it, but I think one of the interesting issues. I think a lot of the sort of the technology issues we've kind of largely addressed. They're mostly engineering issues led, although there's some things of materials and thermal and those things are challenging. And as we evolve, sensor capabilities and that sort of thing are going to be a challenge. I think I'm going to answer it in sort of twofold. One of which I think is going to be right now the warfighter sort of gets it and they do lots of war games and they see how important it is, but actually getting it incorporated into the operational force and worked into all the ConOps and becoming a regular element of the, of the portfolio of capabilities we have is something that needs to get worked on. The other one that I think about a lot is we're off talking about the bullets, right, that we're talking about here, and to really enable the mission capability that these things provide, there's a whole lot more involved in that, right? There's the ISR capabilities, there's the comm capabilities, there's that sort of thing. It's you alluded to. This is the kind of sensor information we're looking for is not the kind of sensor information we get today. It's fire control quality sensor information that you can get to the system in flight so that it can go engage something that's not on a predictable trajectory. So it's the end-to-end mission capability to really release the potential of these systems. I think is going to be something that I think we're all thinking about it and thinking about how to address it. But I think that's going to be, once we get confident we've got the bullets in process, I think that's going to be probably viewed as the next big thing. And people are thinking about it already. It's not that we haven't figured that out.
Yeah. So I agree with the ConOps piece. I think the other thing that I would say is it a cohesive strategy between the agencies and between the different branches of the military such that we're not reinventing the wheel or iterating starting at different points? Is it, do we continue to leverage the technology that we're doing for one agency or one branch of the military to continue to leapfrog those technologies to innovate faster?
Great. And on that theme of not reinventing the wheel, let me, I think, shift from the strike side to the hypersonic defense side. Lisa, you talked about GPI in your opening statement. I think it was the broad area announcement for GPI that MDA put out a couple months ago. And there was just one line in there about, talk to me about the multi-mission applications. And so as we think about the hypersonic defense mission as something that is emerging from the missile defense system of today, as opposed to being a new stovepiped thing, rather than reinventing a new thing for hypersonic defense, grow it out of the missile defense system. What are some thoughts and considerations there for GPI, for other near-term things, and then for sensors? I do want to hit sensors as well.
So what we've talked about is different. So one of our core competencies is launch. So whether it's ground, air, sea, what does that look like, and how do we leverage those technologies with as much commonality as possible? How do we take the building blocks and the components of previous programs that are maybe either already in production or recently were in production to try to be able to go faster? I think we have also looked a lot and spent a lot of our own discretionary looking at hypersonic defense and offense, trying to leverage a lot of those previous technologies and figure out how we can provide mission tailorable capabilities but using the same building blocks that we started from. I think that was an awkward answer, but I got where I wanted to go, which is try to use the same building blocks but make it such that it's mission tailorable, as Mr. White talked about.
Mm-hmm. Great. Other kind of thoughts on that?
I echo that. I think we focus on incremental capability advancements we invest in our IRADs to look at that and potential of other mission applicability when we can, and then of course work with our customers on what those requirements might look like, but are always designing for incremental capability upgrades.
Just a comment, just on the issue of sort of multi-mission capability. I think we all acknowledge that with the magnitude of the challenge that our adversary is posing and just the scale of it, I think the view, which I think is probably right, that we just don't have the luxury anymore of kind of concentrating on a single mission capable platform, right? So I think in this particular case, you wouldn't want to develop a counter-hypersonic weapon that didn't have applicability to the ballistic missile problem or to the cruise missile problem. Right. I think that's the message we're getting, which kind of makes sense. If you think about it, hypersonics is almost kind of what would happen if you married a ballistic missile and a cruise missile, right? It's kind of, it's in that same sort of family. It's got the maneuverability of a cruise missile in some respects, but it's just much faster like a ballistic missile. So, multi-mission solutions I think are doable, and I think the message from the department is just don't come up with a solution that works for that one counter-hypersonic mission only and doesn't deal with the other threats that we're facing.
Well, that just tees up the sensor question.
Yeah.
I feel like I bang a spoon on my high chair about once a week with respect to space sensors, and I'm thinking, of course, Lisa, of HBTSS, which you brought up. It's got both the H and the B, hypersonic and ballistic. Mm-hmm. Wonder if you might kind of kick off a discussion of the sensor side of the house. I think it was the Al-Assad attack in Iraq last January. We had early warning. Turns out sensor notice for incoming missiles is useful, even if you don't have an effector to do it. You can get out of the way and hide or something else. So maybe talk to us a little bit on where your space sensor work is at and where you see that needing to go.
So not only are we employing the best and the brightest for HBTSS and also some other programs I can't really talk about, but one of the key parts of sensor is also going to be sensor fusion. How do you fuse all of the capabilities that you're getting in? Not only continuing to innovate what the sensors can see and what they can detect in different methods, but also how do you fuse that data so that when one sensor is blind to something, it can seamlessly pass that data on to the follow-on sensor so that you don't lose fire control quality data or something that you can act on between those sensors. So we spend a lot of time talking about the network of sensors as well as innovating the sensors themselves. And I guess I don't really feel comfortable going much deeper.
Good. Doug, I think you guys do C2BMC, for instance.
Yes, we do.
We're partners there for sure. Yep. No. So I think, as I think about the MDA space layer, whatever you want to call it, for the longest time, that was only the Missile Defense Agency was doing that, right? And it was, you had Brilliant Eyes and Sibber's Low, and everybody kind of took the view, yeah, they've been at that for a while. It's never going to be real, not really important. I think we've kind of moved beyond that. I think the threat has forced everybody to realize that the ability to do birth-to-death tracking of these threats is actually critical throughout their phases, and you can't do that quite frankly, with the systems that we have today. So we went from MDA working on it, nobody taking it seriously. We now have multiple different agencies engaged, right? MDA is still playing in it. We got the Space Development Agency. We got folks at SMC looking at the tracking layer. So now all of a sudden everybody's doing it, which is, I think, in some level positive. But I think the nation needs to sort of figure out, okay, now that we've decided this is a serious thing, what's the right path for us as an entity to go to kind of deliver the capabilities that we need? And so I think we're hoping to see that sort of convergence on the government side in terms of what's the right path forward as opposed to multiple separate ones. But and we'll do what we can to help try to inform that discussion.
I think if I had a nickel for every time fire control quality data has been used just today,
could buy a satellite.
But I say that because in some respects it's the missile defense mission and the need for high quality, low latency data that is going to push the JADC2 conversation. That's everybody's new favorite acronym, right? Yeah. I want to get to you on sensors, and I'm not forgetting that, but I just want to put that on the table as well. So any thoughts on JADC2 before going on?
Well, I think I made the comment earlier about what are we going to be focused on for years. I think it's going to be that whole end-to-end integration of all sensors and and capabilities for multiple missions to address this. So you could call that JADC2 in a sense. I think I think it is. So no, I think that's going to be really important. And this seems like this almost a perfect case study for it, because it really is the complex kind of a problem that really requires those sorts of integrated capabilities.
And I think it comes back to the answer that I gave in a different question, which was what do we see as an impediment, or what do we worry about in the future, which is that we need to have an agreement on what that common architecture is going to be, so that we're using the same overall architecture to affect the same means, regardless of who the user is.
Let me get back to you on the sensor side of the
Yeah,
piece,
no,
whether it's
all of
ground or
that
space.
ties
whatever.
in. I think, we need to look at that advanced sensing architecture to enable our hypersonic missions. And, part of that is making sure we have networked sensors. Certainly the space layer, the proliferated space layer would add tremendous capability to the hypersonic mission with the persistent tracking. And the JADC2 vision is very important to this. I think an advanced sensing architecture, you need to look at cooperative radars, like a distributed sensing architecture, so that you really minimize any. You can do the handoffs to make sure we keep that persistent track to enable the effects. So that sensing architecture is very important to the mission.
Yeah, great. And let me, I think, connect with the prospect of not just elevated sensors, whether it be LEO or high altitude, what have you. That's going to be critical in the Indo-Pacific, right? For this tyranny of distance stuff, we need to see this stuff sooner. Yeah. So let me kind of pivot from that to the Guam question. PB22 has, I think, within MDA, like $78 million for the Guam thing, but there's other money in other places for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative as well. And of course, hypersonic defense, we can't move or hide Guam. And so active defense is going to have to be part of some really important bases in the Pacific for our power projection. So thoughts on PDI, the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, Guam defense, whether it's ground-based radars or elevated sensors, thoughts on how to move out on that in the coming year or so.
I'll start by also agreeing that ground-based radars are going to be critical for that. I would also say that the ground-based radars need to be ones that that will deter jamming. So our concept is that dual-band radars are the way to go. But certainly we have enjoyed lots of theoretical discussions with Missile Defense Agency about what good looks like there, to the point where I was smiling on the inside when you're talking about JADC2, because frankly, for defense of Guam, we've looked at modeling, best case, worst case, all the different ways to defeat the threat. In addition to charts that came to mind that talked about where are our current gaps in the overall JADC2 architecture and how can we help plug those holes. And not just plug those holes with Northrop Grumman-based technologies. I mean, if Aegis is the right solution, Aegis is the right solution for parts of it or some portion of the threat, or maybe it's a Raytheon technology, but just trying to bring the best to the fight and figure out what's going to defeat that threat, because it's a sincere vulnerability.
I would say that the modeling and simulation we do really looks at how we can enhance what we currently have in that architecture to try to engineer those kill chains. And as for defense of our forward-based assets and in defense of Guam and the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, I think it's very important that we bring forward that comprehensive layered defeat kind of architecture, and that is certainly what we are working in Raytheon Technologies and with our customers to understand what that means, what's important to them with that comprehensive layered architecture, and what we can bring with our industry colleagues to address the requirements.
Erin, you said you had one word in there, and I was hoping you could unpack it. That you said, I think, distributed sensors.
Distributed
so maybe, whether it's bistatics or passive or just creating a broader attack surface. Talk through what distributed sensors might mean.
Really, it comes down to resilience. As I think General Hyten said years back now, there's not enough islands, there's not enough land, we don't have enough surface sensors to see everything. So it's important we have network distributed sensing. And that's what I meant by distributed. And it really comes down to resilience, and then the the network that enables them to pass off the information so that we can always see a complete picture of what's happening in the battle space.
Yeah, great.
Let me just comment briefly on the Guam thing. So yeah, very important location for us. It's the aircraft carrier that can't move. Very dense. We have a lot of stuff packed on it. That's going to continue to be the case. I think I wouldn't want to be there when the balloon goes up, by the way. But in the meantime, it presents us with a tremendous, almost like a test bed opportunity to architect and to go out and do some testing of our concepts for, I would say, not just layered hypersonic, layered defense, hypersonic, ballistic, and cruise, but frankly, the integration of offense and defense as well. So I think it provides a unique opportunity for us to go test out some of those ideas, demonstrate them, drive some of our fielding capabilities, and what we learn and implement there, I think, will have applicability to a broad range of other places. So I think it's going to turn out to be the place where we get to do a lot of the intellectual groundwork for these two mission areas and their integration together. So actually kind of an exciting opportunity.
Yeah.
So.
Well, again, back to the offense-defense integration side, I mean, in a couple of years here, we could be having Army and Air Force hypersonic strike, and you could base them from Guam or island hop or do all kinds of other interesting things.
Yeah, I've commented to people before that if we're sitting somewhere and we see threats launched at us, ballistic, hypersonic, whatever they're going to be, I'm willing to predict the first decision we're going to make is not which interceptor do I launch, because you want to wait until you've got a fire control solution on that. Your first decision is going to be, what's our counter battery operation, right? How are we going to be able to strike those targets while they're still in the air? How are we going to be able to strike those targets to prevent them from launching again, or to get the ones that haven't launched and that sort of thing, while we're figuring out what's our defensive, what's the defensive game plan going to be. So I think those decisions are, you can keep them separate if you want, but they're really going to be in the commander's field. He's going to be wanting to make those decisions in as integrated a way as he can.
And again, I think it's not just about missile defense as a stovepipe or a stovepipe capability, but right of the first launch, left of the second launch, missile defeat approach. Yep. So we ran out of time on the last panel, but I'll throw you this question so that it didn't have a chance in the last one, and that's putting those two things together. And so there's the sensor architecture, and we talk about HBTSS for the defensive side of the house. Mm-hmm. But as we proliferate all these kind of sensors, it sounds, what I hear you saying is going to be important to knit them together for both offensive and defensive applications. Correct.
Yep.
If they provide the right sort of situational awareness, there's no reason why you can't use that capability to do left of launch engagements, right? Because you're going to need enough of a clear kind of picture of the battle space and what the threat's doing. That data will be useful to both offense and defense, right?
Yeah. Well, any experiences from the past year from COVID that you learned that are applicable to this mission? No jokes about masking our capabilities or anything. But your industry again adapting to these circumstances.
Yeah, I applaud my team for the fact that so much of what we do is in a classified setting. So just trying to keep people safe by keeping them distanced required a lot of creativity when it came to working nights and weekends and shifts and other times when typically all of our employees are in the same place at the same time. So a lot of creativity of different things that we could do on a classified versus unclassified side, working closely with our customers to get approval of what we could take from class to unclass was very helpful.
Yeah, I think I would agree on that. Across industry, the amazing ability, because a lot of industries really struggled, but the fact that we kind of kept the focus on the mission and managed to continue to support the mission through that is a really great thing. That said, I really missed, I think a lot of us did, the fact that you couldn't get out, you couldn't come to events like this and interact with your industry partners so much, with your government customers and that sort of thing. And I think over time, there was a cohesiveness, reduction that kind of took place, because we weren't able to share ideas and share perspectives and that sort of thing. So I think we're paying a price for that. I'm glad we're going to be able to get past that here pretty quickly. And unfortunately, and I'm sure that's true of my colleagues, in that environment, Lockheed Martin perfected the art of the internally focused meeting, right? And we managed to fill our calendars up with all these internally focused meetings. And now that we're transitioning out of this, I'm like, I'm done with that. I'm going on travel. I'm going to go meet with my customers. I'm going to go with my partners. But we're going to have to break that cycle a little bit.
Yeah. There was a lot of learning, and resilience has been, is the word that comes to my mind. We never took our eye off the ball. We were able to still collaborate and work with our customers and our colleagues effectively to deliver, programs. Execution is our number one. And then, helping our customers recognize where we can improve, and leveraging the analysis and the simulations to drive that forward. And we did figure out how to do that in a virtual environment. So kudos to us for not taking our eye off the ball.
Great. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I thought we'd just close out with a few thoughts. Your outlook on hypersonic strike and defense for the coming years. Lisa, start us off.
Again, I'm pleased that the defense part has crept back into the budget. I think in 21 there was $3.2 billion for hypersonic, and about $150 million of that was for defense. And MDA's latest request for that budget, and a lot of their collaborative work that they're currently doing with SDA and Space Force. Not only do you need a defense focus in that budget, but also using that same data for offense and defense, as we pointed out a second ago.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly exciting time to be in the industry, right? I mean, particularly if you're interested in hypersonics, it's, the technology is really cool and exciting and interesting. The operational need is now, widely recognized and compelling. So I think it's going to be a very exciting, exciting time for the next 5, 10, 20 years as we build on the work that we've gotten started here in the last couple of years. And what I keep coming back to is there's this propensity to talk about the threat and what the threat's doing, and therefore we have to respond to the threat. But there's certainly truth in that. But I think the real issue that sort of motivates me is the realization that the ability for us to execute our military strategy as a nation requires that we be able to project power around the globe, so we can be there to support our allies and we can keep our adversaries in check. I literally can't imagine us being able to perform that without having these capabilities. And so, if you want to decide, is this important enough to get up in the morning and go to work, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. So it's exciting, and it's an honor to be part of it. So.
Great.
Echo Doug's thing. I think, one of the words we didn't mention today that kind of just is deterrence. Getting up every day to do this mission is really, deterrence is a big part of it. And that force projection capability that, is so important for this mission. So yeah, the budget, $3.8 billion, S&T, development, manufacturing, joint hypersonics transition, just across the board. It is an exciting time, and we are living, we're finally walking the talk of the national security, national defense strategy. And thank you for hosting us, and thank you, Mike White, for coming and addressing us and being our leader, carrying this vision forward.
Well, thanks to all of you for participating. Again, we covered a lot of topics here. Of course, we hope our Chinese and Russian friends wake up every morning and they're deterred and think this isn't a good day to attack the United States of America or its allies. Thanks for all your comments, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this more in the future. And thanks for everybody for tuning in at home. So appreciate it.